Good day, everyone. We are the Rambuto team from BSP31. Our group consists of Mr. Isaiah John Bambico, Ms. Maan Alisa Magadia, Mr. Daryl Joshua Maipa, and myself, Ms. Anne Bernadette Verunque. Our group is guided by our research advisor, Mr. Romeo Luis Ramirez. We are here to present our thesis proposal entitled Optimization Method of Starch Extraction from Rambutan Seeds Using Box Benken Design. The outline of our proposal is as follows. First, we'll start with the introduction, followed by the theoretical background and the methodology. Starch is one of the most abundant types of carbohydrates that can be found in plant parts and is extensively used due to its wide application in food, non-food products, and the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical-grade starch is outsourced by pharmaceutical companies because of its versatility and effective performance in various formulations and is cost-efficient as compared to other excipients. However, despite its high demand, there is no local production of pharmaceutical starch as excipient in the Philippines, and there are only a few plants that are commercially grown to serve as a source of starch, with corn as the most predominant source. Many different plant sources have been studied for their starch content, such as fruits and their parts, one of which is rambutan, specifically its seeds, whose amylose and amylopectin ratio can be comparable to cornstarch. According to statistical reports, the production of fruits has increased, and so is its consumption. Due to increased consumption, large amounts of fruit waste are accumulated. For rambutan, 3,843,638 kilograms of fruit seed and rind waste were generated in our country in the year 2015. Hence, creating a need to find a value-added use for these fruit wastes, which can be addressed by making use of these wastes as alternative sources of excipients in the food and pharmaceutical industry. However, there is still a need for an optimized method of starch extraction of rambutan seeds in order to obtain the highest possible percentage yield of starch, which exhibits better or comparable physicochemical and pharmacopoeial properties. As for the statement of the problem of our study, first is the higher cost of medicines due to the outsourcing of excipients by pharmaceutical companies. Next is the limited local supply of starch despite the high demand in pharmaceutical industry. And also, there are no optimized method of extraction to maximize the yield and quality of rambutan seed starch. Lastly, the waste production and disposal of rambutan. The following are the objectives of our study. This study generally aims to optimize the method of starch extraction from rambutan seeds using box Benken design. Specifically, it aims to determine the interaction of the factors in terms of concentration of sodium metabisulfite, temperature, duration, and solvent type, which would produce the highest percentage yield and best quality of starch in relation to the physicochemical and pharmacopoeial parameters. Next is to derive the equation of the line based on the box Benken design that would predict the percentage yield of the different starch extraction setups. And lastly is to compare the experimentally derived starch from rambutan seeds with the commercially available starch in terms of its quality and its attributed costs. For the significance, the research findings will be substantial to pharmaceutical companies. This study can give them insight on how to possibly lessen the cost of drug production. To manufacturing companies and farmers to reduce or lessen waste disposal and instead increase the utilization of these waste materials that results to an increase in profit. For the environment, to help reduce fruit wastes. To the patients in order to produce more affordable and accessible drugs for the public. And to the government in order to open more opportunities of exporting, expanding global connections, and creating additional income through tax. Now, let's move forward to the conceptual framework. As stated by Rivera in 2020, pharmaceutical-grade starch is in high demand because of its versatility in use and cost-effectivity compared to other excipients. However, despite its high demand, there is no local production of pharmaceutical starch as excipient in the Philippines. For that reason, pharmaceutical companies outsource excipients instead of manufacturing their own starch raw material. From a study by Hartesi et al. In 2016, starch is commonly produced from corn, cassava, sweet potato, wheat, and potato. And as stated by Palanisamy et al. In 2020, pharmaceutical industries predominantly use corn as a source of starch. However, in search of alternative sources of starch, other plant parts have been studied. The study of Arellado et al. In 2018 used fruit seeds, such as the seeds of mango, rambutan, and marang. And among those plants, only rambutan seed starch is comparable and has the most desirable physicochemical and pharmacopoeial property in comparison to cornstarch. This shows that rambutan seed is a potential alternative source of starch. In order to extract starch from rambutan seeds, the alkaline method of extraction is utilized due to its use in various plant sources, especially for seeds. It is the simplest method for the extraction of starch and has an advantage of producing starch with high purity and yield as stated by Albert and Schmer in 2000. The conceptual framework of this study is based on the input-process-output model. The rambutan seeds were collected, prepared, and are subjected to starch extraction using an alkaline steeping method wherein two pairs of reagents for the treatment will be used, namely calcium hydroxide and sodium chloride, and sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid, to determine which reagent pair will result to a higher yield and desirable pharmacopoeial and physicochemical properties. The first set of experimental setups is based on a study by Bahini et al. In 2017, and for the second set, it is based on a study done by Palacios Fonseca et al. In 2016. In order to optimize the starch extraction method of rambutan seeds, an experimental design box-Benken method is used. Box-Benken method is used to identify the best extraction setup that can give the highest yield. It is used to determine the relationship of the variables to the yield without performing all the possible setups. It will be based on a study by Aziz and Aziz in 2018, which used a design that has 15 experimental trials wherein test runs number 1 to 13 are unidentical with various levels but with identical levels for test runs number 13 to 15. The box-Benken design that will be used in the study has 3 independent variables such as the concentration of sodium metabisulfite, temperature, and duration. Then, the starch yield is evaluated by pharmacopoeial and physicochemical characterization, which will be further discussed in the methodology. The physicochemical and pharmacopoeial characterization of starch will be based on the procedures and specifications by USP 41, USP 35, the Handbook of Pharmaceutical Excipients published in 2009, and in various journals by Azupique et al. In 2012, Harros in 2004, and Manalo et al. In 2018. For our study scope and delimitation, the study focuses on the optimization of the method of starch extraction of rambutan seeds by using the box-Benken method. The research involves an experimental research design where starch is extracted from rambutan seeds. Rambutan has many varieties but only one variety of fruit is used in the study. The rambutan variety used in the study was Rongreen and were harvested from Malvar, Batangas between the months of September and October during its peak season. The study will utilize an alkaline steeping method of extraction and will make use of 2 sets of reagents for neutralization, which is calcium hydroxide and sodium chloride, and sodium hydroxide and hydrochloric acid. As for the box-Benken method, there will be 3 variables wherein the variables such as concentration of sodium metabisulfite, temperature, and duration have 3 different specifications or levels. The concentrations of sodium metabisulfite to be used are 0.10%, 0.20%, and 1%. As for the temperatures, 50 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Celsius, and 85 degrees Celsius are to be used. The duration of extraction will be carried out at 12, 18, and 24 hours. In addition to this, This research will compare the rambutan seed starch of the experimental setup that produced the greatest yield to the commercially available corn starch in terms of physicochemical and pharmacopoeial characteristics by performing various pharmacopoeial and physicochemical tests that will be further discussed in the methodology. The extraction of starch and the pharmacopoeial and physicochemical tests will be performed in the LSHSI College of Pharmacy laboratories. This study also covers attributed cost using pricing quality model. This includes identifying the relationship of the quality of the rambutan seed starch and the cost needed to produce it. The study does not include the comparison of cost of rambutan seed starch and the commercially available corn starch.
Thank you, Ms. Verunke. Now I will head on to the discussion of the methodology of the study. The study involves an experimental research design, whereas starch was extracted from the seed of a rambutan fruit, which is harvested during its peak season. For the materials and equipment needed, a hot air oven located at De La Salle Medical and Health Sciences Institute, College of Pharmacy is used in oven drying the seed samples. Then, the dried seed samples are subjected to moisture content determination using moisture analyzer located as well in the LSMHSI College of Pharmacy, while a pulverizing machine batch type RT12 located in UP National Institute of Health Manila is used to powderize the seed samples in order to be able to pass into a US sieve mesh number 80 with a principal size of 180 micrometers. Then, the pulverized seed samples will be weighed prior to storage using a top-loading balance located as well in DLSM HSI College of Pharmacy. The physicochemical characterization of the isolated starch will include solubility and swelling temperature determination. A centrifuge located at DLSM HSI College of Pharmacy is going to be used. Furthermore, the determination of amylose-amylopectin ratio will have its absorbance measured using a Hitachi UV-Vis double-beam spectrophotometer located as well in DLSM HSI College of Pharmacy. Now, in the process of sample collection and sample preparation, disclaimer that the researchers had already done these processes on the month of October to November the year 2020 with proper procedures, parameters, and approval of the thesis advisor and research head instructor. The rambutan fruits used in the study came from a rambutan plantation located in Malvar, Batangas, but the fruits were purchased at the Dasmariñas Wet and Dry Market. For the extraction setup of the study, a box Benken design is used. The box Benken design is a type of a response surface design that is commonly used for method optimization. Particularly, this study utilized a three-factor, three-level design wherein there are three factors or independent variables represented by letters A, B, and C, with three levels for each factor represented by numbers -1 for low level, 0 for mid-level, and +1 for high level. A codes for duration of treatment in hours with 12 hours as the low level, 18 hours as the mid-level, and 24 hours as the high level, while B codes for the working temperature of extraction in degrees Celsius, with 50 degrees Celsius as the low level, 68 degrees Celsius as the mid-level, and 85 degrees Celsius for the high level. Lastly, C codes for the concentration of sodium metabisulfite in percentage weight per volume, which in the menstruum with 0.1% of the low level, 0.2% as the mid-level, and 1% as the high level. These factors and levels were selected based on available published journals. Applying basic mathematical concept, three factors raised to three levels for each factor would lead to 27 possible combinations. In method optimization studies, not all combinations will be experimentally tested to maximize the limited resources such as time, money, and effort aside from the availability of reagents. With box Benken design, only 13 combinations will be conducted out of 27. And to account for the deviation across the setups, the 13th setup is replicated twice to come up with additional setups 14 and 15 that are identical with the 13th setup. This is the beauty of Box-Benken design. It is to refrain from implementing all 27 setups times 3 to account for the trials, for a total of 81 setups. Instead, we will only have a total of 15 setups, already accounting for the 3 trials. To further explain the setup, here is the table showing the preset combinations of Box-Benken design for 3 factors with 3 levels each. Looking at setup number 1, it will utilize 12 hours of treatment duration at 50 degrees Celsius working temperature using 0.2% concentration of sodium metabisulfite. And in setup number 2, it would utilize 12 hours of treatment duration at 85 degrees Celsius of working temperature using 0.2% concentration of sodium metabisulfite and so on. In setups 13, 14, and 15, it will utilize 18 hours of treatment duration at 68 degrees Celsius working temperature using 0.2% concentration of sodium metabisulfite. In each setup, the dependent variables are the percentage yield and results of various quality tests. Based on the experimental values that will be obtained, the equation of the line to predict the percentage yield may be derived through the second-order polynomial model. The general equation is as follows, which would also reflect the degree of interaction of the factors and levels with each other. Moving on to the extraction process or the isolation of starch. This is the overview of the schematic diagram that will be used for this process, which will branch into two groups of 15 setups depending on the acid and base that will be used. So breaking it down, it begins with the sample that is stored below 5 degrees Celsius 4 months prior to extraction process. It is subjected to oven drying to achieve a moisture content of less than 3.5%. Then it is passed into a US sieve mesh number 80 with a principal size of 180 micrometers. Next, it will be soaked at a varying duration in varying concentration of sodium metabisulfite. Then it is immersed for 16 hours in varying temperature of 80% ethanol solution. After soaking, it is decanted and filtered. This is the point of branching. The residue obtained is treated with 0.1 molar sodium hydroxide in one group of 15 setups, and the other group of 15 setups using 30% calcium hydroxide. It is let to sit and cover for 18 hours at room temperature, then it is decanted and filtered. Then the residue obtained will be washed to neutralize using 0.1 molar hydrochloric acid for the group of 15 setups that will utilize 0.1 molar sodium hydroxide and 10% sodium chloride for the group of the 15 setups that will utilize 30% calcium hydroxide. After this step, it is washed with distilled water several times until lightly colored. Then the residue is then filtered using vacuum filtration. The residue obtained is spread in a aluminum tray, oven dried for 2 hours at 60 degrees Celsius, and passed through a US sieve mesh number 80 with a principal size of 180 micrometers. Lastly, it is stored in a container at 5 degrees Celsius until analyzed. Now, Ms. Magadia will discuss the physicochemical and pharmacopoeial tests for the starch samples.
Here we have a list of assays for the physicochemical characterization of starch. Disclaimer, the following tests are chosen to perform based on its feasibility and are arranged by United States Pharmacopoeia being the topmost priority, followed by the Handbook of Excipients and other studies. For the angular free pose, it is to describe the flowability of starch powders which is crucial in manufacturing and drug formulation. The acceptance criteria is 25 to 30 degrees, which indicates excellent flow properties. Density measurements of starch are important for functional properties like powder flow and compactability. For its acceptance criteria, cornstarch has a bulk density of 0.45 to 0.58 grams per cubic centimeter and a tap density of 0.69 to 0.77 grams per cubic centimeter. Another test to describe the powder flow is the compressibility index and Hausner ratio that shows excellent flowability character if it is less than 10% and having the values of 1 to 1.11 respectively. For particle size distribution, it is performed to determine the particle size of a potential excipient, which affects formulation properties such as powder segregation and flowability. Providing its acceptance criteria, cornstarch has a particle size ranging from 2 to 32 millimeters with an average particle size diameter of 13 millimeters. The percentage yield is computed to determine how much starch can be isolated or extracted from the rambutan seed sample. In the study of Arolado in 2018, rambutan seed has a percentage starch yield of 56.06%. Another test is the amylose-amylopectin ratio, which determines the potential utilization of starch. However, the amylose content largely influences the functional properties of starch. The amylose content of cornstarch is 24 to 28%. Test for solubility is to determine the relative composition of amylose and amylopectin in a starch sample, whereas test for swelling power is to determine the degree of swelling influenced by the hydrogen bonding of starch with water when they are heated. These parameters are significant because it influences the pasting characteristics of starch as an excipient. For its acceptance criteria, it is a standard deviation from the standard, which is cornstarch. Moving on with the assays for the pharmacopoeial characterization of starch, the USP specifications in 2018 provide an acceptance criterion for the following tests. Identification test is used to determine the presence of starch in the sample, which gives an observable positive result of orange red to dark blue color, which disappears when heated. Residue and ignition measures the amount of residual substance or metal contaminants from a sample, simply a test for purity. Acceptance criteria is not more than 0.6%. Limit of iron is also a test for purity, which gives an observable intensity of pink color. Loss on drying is a test that measures the total change in weight of a starch sample when dried. Acceptance criteria should be not more than 15%. pH is a test to determine if a sample is acidic or basic as a result from the extraction process. Acceptance criteria ranges from 4 to 7. Microbial evaluation determines the stability of the starch powder, wherein the total aerobic microbial count does not exceed 103 colony-forming unit per gram, and the total combined molds and yeast count does not exceed 102 colony-forming unit per gram, and absence of E. coli. For moisture content determination, it measures the water content in the starch sample. As stated in the Handbook of Excipients, the approximate equilibrium moisture of cornstarch at 50% relative humidity is 12%.
Now Mr. Maipa will discuss the statistical tools used in the study as well as the presented Gantt chart.
For the statistical analysis, different statistical tools were used such as the multiple linear regression, one-way ANOVA, two-tailed t-test, and descriptive statistics. The results obtained from the two treatment setups were carried out according to the Box-Benkin design, which follows the second-order polynomial model to generate the multiple linear regression. This predicts the outcome of the dependent variable through multiple independent variables. The results from the two treatment setups, such as the 0.1N sodium hydroxide and 0.1M hydrochloric acid for treatment 1, and 30% calcium hydroxide and 10% sodium chloride for treatment 2 will be compared in terms of their yield and quality. So by applying the multiple linear regression on the experimental data, the second-order polynomial model was found to identify the significance and relationship between the dependent variable, which is the yield and quality of the starch to be extracted, and the independent variable such as the concentration, temperature, and duration of time to be used on the two treatment setups. The data results from the multiple linear regression will be interpreted using a coefficient of determination, or R squared, wherein it calculates the closeness of the data to the linear regression line in percentage. Also, multiple linear regression was associated with the one-way analysis of variance, or one-way ANOVA, in determining the differences in the conditions of the parameters used and classifying the relative importance of the two treatment setups, concentration, temperature, and duration of time on the yield and quality of the starch that will be extracted. Next is two-tailed t-test, which focuses only on the comparison of the yield acquired from the 15 setups of each treatment used. It tests whether a setup is greater or lesser than a certain range, specifically the acceptance and the rejection range. And in terms of their physicochemical and pharmacopoeial characteristics, descriptive statistics was used to provide summaries about the comparison of the quality of the experimentally derived starch with the commercially available starch. The highest yield of each treatment setups will undergo quality testing as well as the commercially available starch in order to determine, interpret, and analyze the data obtained from the test. Through this, the experimentally derived starch and the commercially available starch difference in characteristics will be identified and observed in a more simpler and generalized way possible. In related to the objectives of the research, given the data that will be acquired from achieving objective number 1, which is to determine which would produce the highest percentage yield and best quality of starch on the factors used, the statistical tools to be used is multiple linear regression, one-way ANOVA, and two-tailed t-test. And in order to aid the data that will be retrieved on the objective number 2, which is to derive the equation of the line based on the Box-Benkin design that would predict the percentage yield of the different starch extraction setups, multiple linear regression and one-way ANOVA will be used. Lastly, in order to analyze the data in answering Objective 3, which is to compare the experimentally derived starch from the commercially available starch in terms of their quality and attributed cost, descriptive statistics will be applied. So, as you can see from our Gantt chart, these are the things that our group accomplished. The beginning of the process of our research can be tracked down in the month of September to October. Sample collections and initial sample preparations, as well as the writing of the chapter 1 and 2 is done. And in the month of November to December, the following are accomplished: conducting an RRL, making a schematic diagram for the sample preparation and starch extraction, contacting BPI for plant authentication, and the collection of plant sample for authentication. January, which is the first month of the year, our group accomplished Chapter 3, which is the methodology and all of the schematic diagram needed for the assay tests.
Thank you, Mr. Maipa. Now I will discuss shortly the budget proposal for this study that consists of the cost for rambutan sample, transportation expenditures, and materials used in the sample collection and preparation. That in the sample collection and preparation, the total cost is about 4,400 pesos. Then the predicted cost for the reagents that will be used in the extraction process is about 6,648 pesos. And for the initial predicted cost for the reagents that will be used in the assay testing is approximately 2,846 pesos. Lastly, cost of analytical grade cornstarch for assay testing has a minimum amount cost of 5,800 pesos for a total of 19,695 pesos. Lastly, Here are the references used in our research. Again, this is the optimization method of starch extraction from rambutan seeds using Buxbaumken design. Thank you for listening and God bless.